Hello, my name is Olivia Mattis, and I'm so happy that you have joined us here today. You all saw a really touching, important, and groundbreaking film by the Academy Award winning filmmaker, Aviva Slesin, and we have her with us here today. She won an Academy Award for another film of hers called the Algonquin Round Table, and she teaches a masterclass in documentary filmmaking at New York University, NYU. So, Aviva, why don't we start out by your laying the groundwork for us and telling the audience what you would like them to know?
Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Aviva Slesin. I made this film in 2002, and it was very lucky because the rescuers were getting on in age, and I think at this point they're gone. So I feel that it was a piece of luck that I started the film and got to make it. The film started because I was myself a hidden child, and I went back to Lithuania in the 90s, and my rescuer, the woman of the couple, was still alive. It was the last year of her life, and I got to meet her, and I got to ask her why she did it, why she hid me, why she took the chance. And it was incredibly moving to me to do that. Of course, she spoke Lithuanian and I spoke English, so I had to have a translator, which is always a little odd, but it worked very well. The feelings that we had for each other were amazing. And I was very young when I was hidden. I was born in 1942, and so I didn't have any memories. And so all of these feelings that came up when I met my rescuer were not hinged on any memories. They were just new, and they were very, I guess, moving. I keep saying the same word, but that's what they were. And so I went home, and I had never, my own mother, who survived, luckily, she wasn't a big talker. Her idea of my life was that I had been lucky, and that's about it. And so I don't know how many of you know, but there wasn't that much talk about the past. She was not a big talker. I found that people either talked and talked and talked and talked, or they didn't say anything. My mother sort of wanted to put it all behind her. In fact, when I invited her to come to Lithuania with me, she said, "Why do you want to go there?" She really thought, why is she doing this? And but when I went, for me, it was an amazing experience. And although I had been a filmmaker my whole life, I had made cultural films, not anything to do with the Holocaust, as far away from the Holocaust as I could, to tell you the truth. But in this case, I thought, after I met her, I thought, let's see what I can do. I don't have my own memories. So I started to, do what it takes to get a film started, which is raise money and write proposals and think of things and try and find things. And what did I want to know? I wanted to know why they hid us, why they risked their lives, why they did what they did. I wanted to know what that had done to all of us. I certainly had my problems and a lot of therapy and but I had a life. And so I really wanted very much to know what had happened to other hidden children who might have their memories. And if there is a criticism to the film that I've heard, it's that I don't tell my story. And in fact, I don't tell my story because I don't have my own memory of my story. And I really didn't feel it was right to tell my mother's version of my story in my film. So I looked to other people to tell stories that they remembered firsthand. And in fact, that worked very well for me, because when people say you didn't tell your story, my answer is the film is my story. I knew how to make that film because it's my story. It's not, it's not something I had to research a lot. So that's one thing. The other criteria I wanted in the film was always to have a rescuer and the hidden child in the same frame, because I feel that when we're all gone, that there will be a huge revision of that history. So the film had to start with the parents. In my opinion, the film had to start with the parents making a decision to give their children away. It was a hard decision, but as Julia Meltzer in this clip says, do whatever you want. You can punish her, you can christen her, only keep her alive. The game was life and death. The game was not how to treat the child and how to be a mother and how to dress or, do anything to the child except keep them alive. And you had to have that kind of strength in order to give your child to a stranger, in order to ask a stranger to ask your. So by the time I was making the film, I was very lucky to find Mr. and Mrs. Meltzer and their daughter Alice, because it was the push that started the situation, and it was the beginning of the film. And so the idea of how these children, some of them were converted, some of them had to be hidden in all kinds of places. That couldn't be part of the picture. The picture was keep them alive. So we're already in a situation where there's very little that room for anything else. And Mr. and Mrs. Meltzer really portrayed for me the decision that must have been an extraordinarily difficult one for parents, but it was the only one that really mattered. And there were parents who didn't give their children, and there were parents who didn't put them on the train for the kinder transports, which was different because that was legal. So it had to happen. The story had to begin with parents who made the decision to take a chance and give the child away. The chance was that they themselves would not survive. The chance was that their children would not be well treated. The chance was that their children might be put into servitude or converted. They couldn't pay attention to that voice. The chance was to keep their children alive. And that was the criteria that we were looking for. The big criteria of the film, why another reason that I really wanted to know was what made them do it? What made people take in children at risking not only their lives, but their families. And in fact, because of collective responsibility, the whole neighborhood was involved. If they found someone, then the whole neighborhood, that's a war strategy, collective responsibility, that you make a whole apartment building responsible for what one person does, which means the neighbors were also very quick to report someone hiding a child, because it meant their own safety, not because they were mean necessarily, but because they didn't want their own safety disregarded. So there were many layers of what was going on. And I think that the idea of the parents has always been very moving to me, because they actually had no idea what would happen to either one of them. And this is what I think that was about.
So the way we're going to do it is we have you, Aviva. I'm glad you're here. We also have Peter Hellman with us, although I don't see his camera. It's possible we only have him on phone. Peter, can you say something?
Yes, I could say something, and mine shows the camera is okay.
Fantastic.
And I see myself. You don't see me?
Yes, I do see you. So let me introduce you. Peter Hellman is one of the pioneers in writing about Holocaust rescue. He wrote a groundbreaking book that was published in 1980 called Avenue of the Righteous, named after the boulevard at Yad Vashem, where there are trees planted for those who saved Jews during the Holocaust, including our own hero that we honor here, Aristides de Souza Mendez.
I was not a hidden child, nothing close to that. I grew up in Falls Church, Virginia, only thinking about baseball and fishing and all the things that free young children, especially boys in my case, think about. In 1968, on the spur of the moment, I was about to start a job in journalism in New York. I went to Israel and I wandered into Yad Vashem on Mount Herzl. And after walking through the parking lot, I suddenly found myself on a path, and on each side of me, flanking the path, were trees. And under each tree was a little plaque, and on that plaque was the name of some person and their country. And I saw that this was called Avenue des Justes in French, Avenue of the Just, but I didn't understand what it was. So I went to the administration building and I found the Department of the Just, and I said, what is this all about? And I was told that in 1956, when the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial law was passed, in it was a requirement that not only the 6 million victims be remembered, but also, however small a number they were, the rescuers would also be remembered. And to show the importance of this, a committee was set up on the righteous under the leadership of Moshe Landau, who was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the State of Israel, and coincidentally had been the chief judge at the trial of Eichmann. And careful guidelines were set up for how to honor rescuers. And the decision was, well, we'll plant a tree. That's what Israelis do, they plant trees. And so I was walking along the Avenue of the Righteous. Currently on the Avenue of the Righteous, I'm just going to give you a few dry figures because Aviva's film is so awash in emotion that maybe a few figures wouldn't hurt. Currently on the Avenue of the Righteous, it's no longer only trees. The trees kind of stopped some years back, and they're now, the names of the righteous are put up on tablets. Currently, there are 27,921 rescuers who have been honored. They are all individuals except for one, and there's a single tree, original tree for the Danish people, because the Danes said, we don't want individuals to be honored. We'll just take the whole nation because we all did something. And so there's one tree for Denmark and all the rest are individual. Of those 27,921 honored in the Avenue of the Righteous, I'll tell you the numbers of the most. You'll be surprised maybe. The country with the most rescuers is Poland, 7,177 righteous persons from Poland. Next, Holland, 5,910. Next, France, 4,150. And next, Ukraine, 2,673. I will only tell you that you'd be surprised at certain countries that do have honored rescuers on the Avenue of the Righteous, and I'll name you 5. This will surprise you. Ireland, Vietnam, Peru, Japan, and Egypt. Each one of those countries contributed at least one rescuer to be honored at Yad Vashem. Okay.
Aviva, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that it's extremely distorting to see this film and to hear the numbers, because it sounds like there were a ton of rescuers. And there were not a ton of rescuers. There were a tiny, tiny fraction given what was going on. And I think that one of the things that happens when you make a film is, of course, you have to find subjects who are the rescuers. So the balance in the film is that they are stories of rescue, but the balance in history is that they were a tiny fraction. And so I'm always nervous when the numbers come up and how many and how great they were and all of that, because they were a tiny fraction. And people don't risk their lives that easily, and they didn't then either. But there was that number, there was a few who did it. And so when you see Mrs. von Drockstein say, of course we did it, I put that in because she was a special person. It's not of course. It's not at all of course. It's some people took money, some people did it to convert children, some people did it for cheap labor, but even with that, it was very, very few. So for me, the of course we did it is almost ironic because it's not so. So that's what I'd like to say.
So now let me have the pleasure of introducing our third speaker, and that is Dr. Noemi Perelman-Mattes. She is a psychologist. She was first trained as a lawyer in Belgium. She was herself a hidden child in Belgium. But she's not here to tell her own history. We actually have had her as a guest about 2 years ago when we showed a different film. And on that program, which you can find on our YouTube channel, she did talk about her own history. She's not talking about that today. She's here as a psychologist. And I'm wondering, Dr. Mattes, Mom, if there are some opening remarks you'd like to make to our audience.
Yes, I have prepared some opening remarks. As a psychologist, I loved Aviva's movie because it looks not only at the events, but also at the myriad emotional responses to these events. She views her topics through a wide lens, focusing not only on the children, but also on the adults who made the decisions, that is, the parents who sent their children away, and the rescuers who came forward to save those children. For those adults, those were momentous decisions. Imagine being this parent of a young child. There is danger. You want to pull this child closer. No one loves that child as you do, or could protect her better. But you now realize that her being with you puts her in greater danger, and you have to trust others to take her away, people you might not even know. You have to say goodbye, not sure that you will all stay alive and reunite. As for the rescuers, they need the courage to risk their lives for a child, maybe a child they never met before. And they need to commit to raising that child for months or years. It's a lot of work to raise a child. And then give her back after the war, maybe never see her again. There are other heroes in those stories who are not included in the movie, and that is the local resistance. Many parents did not know anyone who would take their children, especially in Belgium, where I come from, and where many of these parents were themselves refugees from Germany or East European countries. Resistant members stepped in, used their connections to find places for the children, homes or convents. These people also risked their lives as they collected the children from their parents and brought them to a place of hiding. And we should include them and honor them as well.
So let's go through our slides. We can actually go back to the first one again if Peter, you might have something to add. And if not, we'll just go on to the second slide. So let's put up that first slide. Peter, if you want to say something, feel free. And if not, we'll just move to the second slide.
Should I be seen? There we go. Okay, I said do whatever you want. You can punish her, you can christen her, only keep her alive. I'm not going to talk all the time, but this slide brought to mind a story in my book, and Olivia's mother knows this story very well. There was a couple in Brussels, and when the Nazis came, it became clear after a while that it was very dangerous for the family, and in particular for the 3-year-old son of this Lipski family. His name was Rafi Lipski. And so they lent their child to a family who kept him for a short time, and then they said, we're frightened, we can't keep this boy anymore, 3.5 years old. And so they thought, who could they possibly get now? And the person that came to mind was a very independent single woman who Henriette Choma was her name. She never married. She seemed to never have wanted children, but she immediately said, yes, I will take this child. And she did. And now I'll just jump forward and say there came a time when she was in the park with this child, and some people who knew who he was saw Rafi Lipski, and they said hello. And the word got back to his parents. Madame Choma has been found out with your son, and there was a meeting late that night to decide what to do. And while the Madame Choma and Rafi's parents were talking, suddenly the bedroom door opened, and out walked this 3.5-year-old. Now, Madame Choma had trained him carefully to say, your name is not Rafi Lipski, your name is Nick Loubet. Nick Loubet. Nick Loubet. She pushed that into him. First he resisted, but eventually he accepted it. And now was the moment to test. So Madame Choma said to this little boy, where are your parents? Oh, my parents were killed in the war. They were killed by a bomb, and now they have gone to heaven. And what is your name? My name is Nicolas Loubet. And he looked right at his parents as if he didn't know them. And then he went back to bed. When the liberation came at the end of the war, he rushed out, saw his parents, hugged them and kissed them, and he was back to how he was before he became Nick Loubet. So when I think of this quote, only keep her alive, well, only keep him alive in this case, was difficult to do. It did require a complete change of identity, which he accepted. And then at the end of the war, he switched back to being Rafi Lipski.
So then we have another slide about a rescuer. And I'll read that slide when it comes up. And she says, if the children had not been here, I probably would have kept doing things for the resistance outside, and my life would have been much more in danger. I think they saved my life too.
What I have to say about this is that it's not really true. The children did not save the rescuers' lives. I can just say again that these rescuers didn't, they didn't, I kept asking them why they did what they did. And I never got an answer, because it was almost as if they didn't understand the question. It was their nature to do something. And it's some people's nature to do something, and it's other people's nature not to do something. It's not something we have that much control over. It's like the person who jumps in to save someone who's drowning. But I have noticed, I don't think there is a portrait of the rescuer in my book. They were all very, very different. And in the end, what I came away with is that it was a great mystery. Sort of goodness, which is what they displayed, is as much of a mystery as evil. It's really incomprehensible in some way. I mean, I know that there are, ideas about it, but they don't fit everybody. Not everybody who was a communist saved children. Not everybody who hated the Germans saved children. Not everybody who could save children. It had an element of mystery about it. And although I'm not a woo-woo person, I'm not telling you it was, in the stars, But I do believe that there's an element of mystery and goodness, as there is in the opposite, which is evil. And for me, as I was making the film, that became clear. No one could tell me why they did it. That was actually something where you could say, ah, if you were that kind of a person.
So let's move on to the next slide if we could, which now gives the perspective of the hidden child. Because of course it's a triad. There is the parent who places the child, the adult, the rescuer who receives the child, and then the experience of that child. So let's see what the next slide has. So this is a hidden child named Michelle Nagar with his rescuer. And he speaks about her. He says, we called her Tanta Han. This is one of the rescuers we just saw. Her name was Johanna, but they called her Han, Tanta Han. Tanta means aunt, but in a certain sense, she was our mother. So my mother, what would you like to say about this slide?
For many of the children, the time spent with their rescuers was not a story of horrors. Of course, there were terrible exceptions, but overall, the rescuers were caring and protective of the children's feelings. How the children related to the rescuers depended on many things. A big factor was age. The crucial age for bonding between caretaker and child is between ages 1 and 2. For children who went into hiding when very young, the caretaker truly became the attachment figure. And for them, the trauma of separation came when they left the rescuer. If children were older and had benefited from a strong bonding with their parents, they could relate to the rescuers while remaining attached to their parents. The children's situation was similar in some ways to foster care, but there were important differences. Nowadays, when children go into foster care, it's usually because of parental abuse or parental neglect. And this was not usually the case for the hidden children, so they may have been more resilient in terms of human attachment. Another important difference was that the children were given a different name and a cover story, and they had to adapt to completely different situations. In my own life, I needed to adapt to 3 successive homes and the expectations connected to social standing. The first home was in a prosperous family, members of the aristocracy. The second family was so poor, they did not have indoor plumbing, except for a cold water sink in the kitchen. The third was the Goldilocks residents. But all were very different from my parents' home, and the lives in their homes was completely different to what I had been used to. The different name and the alternate identity play a big role after the child later reconnects with her family and has to leave a wartime self behind.
Good. So let's move to the next slide if we could. And this is Moana, whom we meet in the film. And she says, the war started for me after the war. So what does that mean when she says that? I think my mother is up first on this one.
After the war, the children left the home of the rescuers and were returned to the Jewish community. And here again, I want to give kudos to Aviva for extending her narrative and dispelling the usual happily ever after ending. In fact, the return was rarely an easy event. Some parents have returned from concentration camps. They suffer from severe PTSD, and they are dysfunctional. They have a hard time relating to mundane issues. They feel depleted. They have nothing to give. Other parents have not returned. relatives are asked to step up and take the children, and they remove them from the rescuer's home, even if the rescuers offer to keep them. For some children, this is the deepest of traumas. My friend Anita's parents had entrusted her to her nanny and probably left some money to defray her care. Anita hated the aunt and uncle who took her in after the war because they treated her like Cinderella. They forbade her to see her former nanny, and they sued the nanny for an accounting of the money. Now, what about the children who did not have relatives to take them in? This became the subject of passionate debates and several lawsuits in Belgium. Some people felt that the children's comfort should come first and they should be adopted by their Gentile families. But the Zionist members of the Jewish community were adamant that given all that they had lost, the Jewish community needed to reclaim them. We could not lose any more Jews, any more Jewish children. Doing otherwise than reclaiming them would have continued Hitler's plan. My mother was instrumental in creating Jewish orphanages where the children could create a new family until they could emigrate to what later became Israel. The luckiest children found parents who had not been deported and who were functional. But even then, the natural mother had mixed emotions of gratitude, but rivalry was the foster mother. My friend Raf and Peter spoke about him. My friend Raf had been saved by a single woman whom he called Tati. Raf's parents thought that it would be best for the child if Tati moved in with them. But the situation remained very difficult. It was best for Raf maybe, but it was very, very difficult for both of the women who each claimed some title to being the child's mother.
Wow. Aviva, what would you like to add about the Moana story?
I wanted to say about the children that for me was the most difficult thing, because I think the results of those bondings and rebondings and identity issues and religion issues and whose child are you are so rich, and they affect your entire life. I think for Moana, her whole life was affected by that. I would also say my life and almost every other hidden child I know in different ways. I think that there was a wonderful psychologist in Amsterdam, Bloema Evers Emden, and she wrote her books in Dutch. So I didn't know them, but she said that the main thing she said is that children only have so many bondings in them. And for me, this was a really important thing to know, because we did attach. And it depends how much we had before we attached to how much we attached to our parents, how much life we had with them before we were given away. And then how much time we had to bond with the rescuer. And if we were given away more than once, the bonding started to unravel in some way, and they unraveled our ability to bond. And I see that a lot in my own life, and I see it a lot in other people's lives for whom there were similar situations. This doesn't go away. I say that because I have high regard and have been in therapy for many more years than I like to admit, but it's sort of the therapy. I think what happens is you build on top of that rotten foundation. I don't think, for me, I'm not a psychologist, but for me, I had to build a life on top. I couldn't change the rotten foundation. And so whenever it came up, ugh, it ruined things, and it keeps on doing that. But you are able to build on top of it with some help. And I think that's what Hidden Children did. I think that's what children who are adopted more than once, or those children, remember they were adoptions and they couldn't understand why the children didn't bond with the new parents who were so happy. Well, they had too many things that happened. So I see that as something that is a very interesting psychological and constant effect of being in hiding.
Okay, let's go on to the next slide if we could. After the war, she loved everybody except me, says this parent. So who is talking about this one?
I think Aviva is going first.
I think I'd be happy to say something, but I think I said what I had to say about it. I think especially with, I think you can see, for those of you who saw the film, that Alice never rebonded with her parents. And that there's I put her in the middle of them, as you can see. She's sitting between her mother and her father. And she allowed me to do that. And I knew it would make her uncomfortable. And I knew it would show physically what she would not say out loud in their presence. And it did. I don't know if you can see her discomfort and feel it, but I certainly can. And I think it shows better than any words what happened there, and what happened to many hidden children who thought their rescuers were their parents, and who then had to meet people who had themselves been so damaged, and for the most part, if they came back. So that's what I wanted to say.
Mother, you're next.
Yes. Even under the best of circumstances, it is normal for the birth mother to feel cheated because she has missed so much of her child's life through no fault of her own. She's grateful to the rescuer, but also jealous of the child's split allegiance. And I think Aviva and I both understand the importance of this bonding and multiple bonding, and the jealousies and the rivalries that come from that. We have all seen film segments about former hidden children seeking to reconnect with their rescuers. They all seem to be middle-aged, often with grown children of their own. And I wonder what took them so long. And the rescuer may have wondered, where is the gratitude? And as a psychologist, I'm full of hypotheses. The first one, we have all spoken of the long silence of the war survivors. And this is really not unique to the hidden children or the survivors of the Holocaust. All trauma survivors resist their memories. They do not want to go back there and reawaken the feeling of helplessness that you once felt. So before they reconnect with their rescuers, they need to feel strong and grounded. And second, I spoke earlier of this alternate identity which the children had to embrace with a different name, different families, different expected behaviors. And this may make it easier to distance from the memories and the people involved in those memories. Like it's an alternate self. It's not me anymore. And my third hypothesis is that the child survivor is protecting the parent. The parent has jealousy towards the rescuer, and the child wants to protect the parent. She doesn't want to open her parent's wounds and publicly admit how much he or she loved the rescuer.
Let's go to the next slide, please. And now we get to a very interesting perspective This is Hetty Voss Cruz. She is the daughter of a rescuer. And she says, I have been angry most of my life. The thing I resented for so long is that they risked our lives as well as their own. They risked our lives as well as their own. But that's their business if they want to risk their lives. And Aviva, I think you have something to say about this.
Yes, the next sentence in the film, Hetty admits that she has been angry. Oh, she admits it right here, most of her life. For me, that was a real find for the film because I had never actually thought about the rescuers' families. I had only thought of the people who rescued us, not that they had children and that those children were affected by their parents suddenly taking in other children and how this worked. And when I was doing research for the film, I came across Mrs. Vos, the rescuer, and Hetty and Barbara. They were sisters. And when I spoke on the phone to Hetty, she told me this. And I was extremely excited. And I said, would you ever say that on camera? And she said, yes, but only if you film me by myself, not with my sister, because my sister doesn't feel that way. And I said, done, no problem. But for me, it was an extremely interesting side view that I had never even considered, because my rescuer also had children. And I know those children because I went back to Lithuania and I know what happened to them. And so I understand much better that it was affected the whole family, especially because Hetty, if you remember in the film, she said it was confusing outside. If you know, we had to lie about what was going on. But if we lied inside the family, we were punished. You're not supposed to lie as a child. But so all of those things were contrasting things. And also Hetty, the one who says this later on, when Moana was taken away from that family, because she said, but she was our sister and she was torn away from us. And for me, this shows how many levels are going on at the same time in those kind of relationships. It's not that she hated her sister. It's not even that she hated her parents. It's that she had problems with all of that because of how it affected her. I also want to say just very quickly that one of the other things that, why didn't that happen to her sister? Why did her sister not feel resentful? And I learned in my research that when they were young, the sister had scarlet fever and the parents paid more attention to the sister when she was sick than she did to Hetty. Again, this is part of the mix. It means that maybe she got some attention at a time when a child can't ask for it, but that's like the most important time to fill up with some attention. And Hetty didn't get that. So it allowed her to move into her anger for their whole life because she didn't get that special attention. So I'm going on and on about this just in order to say how many levels of reality and psychology were at play in these situations.
And Aviva, I feel that your film is so rich, we could spend 3 hours on it or 3 days in a symposium. We're barely scratching the surface in this hour, and it's just amazing all the different complexities of the story and the history and of your film.
Thank you.
So right now, I'm going to take the floor back briefly. I'd like to invite the audience to continue putting questions into the chat box. I will be moderating the chat. I'll be presenting the questions to our speakers. So while I'm making the announcements, it's a good opportunity for you to continue writing out your questions. So let me tell you about the other 2 programs we have in this month of October. We're taking a break for Yom Kippur and Sukkot. We'll be back on October 23rd for our next program. And that's a program that we're bringing back to our hero. It's a program about Aristides de Sousa Mendes, the Portuguese consul general in Bordeaux, who rescued so many people, thousands of people, including my own family, not my mother's side, my mother whom you see here, but my paternal side was rescued by Aristides de Sousa Mendes, which is why I was moved 12 years ago to co-found the Sousa Mendes Foundation. And in fact, I myself will be one of the speakers. It's my first time in the 2.5 years to actually speak to our audience, aside from the moderator or the host role, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So we have a film for that. It's called Disobedience, the Sousa Mendes story. There's a little bit of a film rental, but the program itself is free of charge, and all you need to do is register. So that is for October 23rd. The following week, October 30th, we are presenting, I think, a unique history, a unique story of survival during the Holocaust. We're presenting a documentary film called No Place on Earth. And it tells the true story of a group of Jewish families, 38 people in total, who survived World War II in a cave. 511 days they were in a cave. That is the longest period of time that any human has survived in a cave. And it was these 38 people. So it's a remarkable story because it starts with this New York police officer who in his spare time is a cave explorer. And he happens upon a cave in Ukraine where he finds a shoe and some buttons and a comb, and is startled to realize that there was human life so many feet below the surface of the earth. And so he starts on this personal quest to figure out, well, who lived there? And then he actually finds them and reaches out to them. He identifies them and contacts them. And then he takes 4 of those survivors and their grandchildren back to the cave to say thank you. So on the program, we have the cave explorer himself, Chris Nicola. We have one of these grandchildren who was brought back to say thank you for saving her family. And we have the filmmaker. So it's quite a unique story. And we're going to see the trailer now.
I'm a New Yorker, but my passion is exploring caves. I was in Ukraine when I stumbled over some objects. Those objects were someone's life. Western Ukraine was one of the worst places for Jews during the war.
We were hiding, and Mother says, Nisso, we gotta find a place. We cannot live like this.
38 of us descended into the cave.
We got down and we started sliding in.
My God, I've got a playground here.
No human being had ever set foot there.
We came there almost without food.
A glass of water was for a family.
We were very hungry.
All of a sudden, we hear shooting.
And my mother said to the kids, hide any place you can.
Everybody started to run in different directions. They took my mother away. I'll never see her again.
The Russians, the Germans, who knows what's outside. The villagers came with the shovels and they filled up the holes.
People are screaming, open up the exit, open up the exit, but they can't do it.
3 days and 3 nights, we were working, everybody.
And I look up and I see a star.
One day I come out, there is this.
And we were liberated. So everybody was crying.
They survived underground for over a year and a half.
I forgot that there was a sun.
Here I am! Bang!
I wanted to say thank you to the cave.
I felt like I'm going back in time.
We beat the odds.
The cave was fighting for me.
They didn't get us.
We didn't tell it to others because it was just too incredible.
Let's close all the lights for a minute. Ah, no, I feel good.
So that's another program that you will not want to miss. So now let's get to your questions. So one of the questions, first of all, before I get to the questions, Aviva, I have to tell you, there are just a deluge of people saying this is the most beautiful or one of the most beautiful films they've ever seen. So
Thank
you
you
have
so
really
much.
touched people.
Thank you.
And so let's start with a question for you, which is simply, how were you able to find the hidden children and their rescuers?
Oh, we looked everywhere. There are groups in many countries that got together, including in Germany, and they get together to talk, they get together to feel better, they get together to share common experiences, and there's newspapers that had them. It was a 4-year search. It was a 4-year film, and much of it was spent in finding rescuers. And for me, it was very important that the people for the film had processed what had happened to them. In other words, many people just sort of told their Holocaust story, and not that they shouldn't, but that wasn't what this was about. It was about processing, understanding, questioning what had happened to them because they had been hidden. So we had a big database of people, but we had a smaller group who had actually thought about what this had meant and what this had done to them and what this had done to the people who did it.
So we have one person wondering why it took so long, so many years, for these hidden children to reach out and look for and contact and meet their rescuers again. Why did it take so long?
Is that for me?
For whoever would like it.
Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody really wanted to talk about it. We were the lucky ones, and we wanted to put the past behind us, and we wanted to be good, in other words, to live again, to be normal, to be somehow accepted in whatever reality we had landed in. And so really, certainly people weren't asking us questions. And when we opened that subject, we were told we were the lucky ones and, move on. And so I think that was a big factor. Wouldn't you say, Noemi?
Yes, absolutely. But I said earlier that all trauma survivors hide their trauma. They don't want to go back there. When you are in such a situation, you feel helpless, and helplessness is the worst possible feeling of all, not to have any control over your life. So you don't want to remember those feelings. You don't want to go back there. And I also said that I believe that in some way we dissociate this part of our past, because in my case, it happened to somebody called Marianne, not to Noemi. It's a different part of my life, and it doesn't connect at all in any way to what my life was later on. And also, I mentioned that sometimes I think that we protected our parents in a way, and we didn't want to recreate the close bond to the rescuers and make our mothers or parents feel all the loss that they had about this time of bonding with their child.
Someone is asking about Michel Nagar. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but he's obviously visibly religious Jew, right? He wears a yarmulke, and yet he was a very proper Catholic boy, it seemed, in the way he would put straws on the baby Jesus at Christmas time and all of this, and how after the war his mother explained to him he had to learn to be Jewish again. So there's curiosity about his story, and I'm wondering, Aviva, if you could shed more light on who he is and more about his story.
Well, as in the film, he says that they went around to many places to find a hiding place. He and his brother was no longer alive when I made the film, but essentially they learned to be Christians because she did try to keep his Jewishness and his religion going. Now, Michel Nagar, you should know, was the Jewish chaplain of the army in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. That was his job. And when he retired, he moved to Israel and lived in the religious community in Israel. So for him, the thing that was very difficult for him was to go back to become a Jewish boy, because he had a very nice life with Mrs. von Drockstein. But when his mother came, they were poor because his father had died and his brother had died. And so the whole idea of Judaism was something that he took back, but not that willingly and not that easily. Although by the time I met him, it was absolutely a part of him. I don't know if that sort of explains more of what you wanted to know, but there were many, many such people. And Mrs. von Drockstein was a very special person. Yes, she was a rescuer, but she was, that the fact that he was religious was something that she helped him with rather than erased. Whereas for Alice, whoever she was with, erased her Judaism and wanted her to be a Christian child. And I want to say that there's a lot of argument about whether, this religion needed to be counted or not. That my colleague in making the film was religious, and she felt that the Jewish children should be returned to Jewish people rather than stay with the rescuers who were not Jewish, obviously. In my book, whoever loves you should keep you. But that's that's an argument
Could I just
forever.
Go ahead, Peter.
But it happens that a few nights ago, my wife and I attended Leopoldstadt, the new play by Tom Stoppard, and the family in this play are stand-in for his own family. And what's interesting is that Tom Stoppard's own mother never ever told him that he was Jewish, even though she was Jewish and his father was Jewish. Now, it was a very splintered family, but this kind of silence, this rejection of who they were, is just, it's something that happens. And we talked about the silence of people. To the end of her life, she never admitted to him, well, she was forced to admit, yes, she was born Jewish, but she wanted to say nothing about the family, very little about his father, who was on a boat that was torpedoed as they were at sea. And so he only learned well into his middle age that he was fully Jewish, and he had to find out what happened to his family. But the silence was pretty voluminous.
Let's turn to our final thoughts. So, Dr. Mattis, Mom, what would you like to say in closing to our audience?
I think that the final thought is the time to turn a little philosophical. So that's what I would like to say. I'm now 86 years old. In the many years since the end of World War II, there has been much progress in science, technology, and medicine, but human nature has not changed. And once again, we see fascism rearing its ugly head in many parts of the so-called civilized world. Racism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia are once again expressed in the open, without shame. And once again, we see acquiescence from those too fearful to speak out, or from optimists who think that this awfulness is temporary and will soon recede. So we need to celebrate those who have the courage to stand up for what is right. And presently, that's true in Russia, in Iran, and right here in America.
Peter, what would you like to say in closing?
I guess having done a book on the righteous, the story that sticks with me and shows what these people can be concerns a Polish woman, Leokadia Jarmirska, who lived in a small village near Warsaw. 1942, going to work, she heard crying in the woods. She followed the sound. She found a child about 2 years old, and she decided on the spot she was going to keep that child. She understood it was the child of a Jewish family that was about to be taken away. And she took the child, she took it home. The neighbors whispered, and at some point they squealed on her, and there was a knock on her door. She went to the door. The child was in her arms. She called the child Bagusia, as gift of God. And there were two German soldiers at the door, and they said, "That's a Jewish child. We know it's a Jewish child, and we're going to take the Jewish child now from you." And she said, "You will not." And they said, "Very well." And they took her around to the back of her building, and there was a stone wall there, which I have seen. And they put her up against the wall with the child, Bagusia, in her arms, and they raised their rifles. And as they were about to shoot, Leokadia said, "Please, sirs, kill me first so I don't have to see the blood of the child." And one soldier looked at the other soldier and said, "Das ist eine richtige Mutter." This must be the real mother, because who else would say that? And they went away. And so here was a case not simply of a woman, in danger, but literally ready to be killed, so she doesn't have to see the blood of the child. So when I think about rescuers, I think about Leokadia. I met her late in her life. She gave everything to that child. Unfortunately for her, at the end of the war, there was a knock on her door, and she opened the door and she saw immediately, this is the real father of the child. And a terrible battle for that child then ensued. The child only wanted to be with the only mother he knew because her own mother had been killed. And she went to Israel. She never was happy again. And Leokadia was never happy again. So, it's tragedy, it's love, it's all the things that happened in this period.
Wow, such high drama in each of these individual families. Aviva, as our filmmaker today, the last word goes to you. What would you like to say in closing to our audience?
I wanted to say that the film was, I don't tell my story, the film tells the story, and I'm really happy that I made it. It was both the work of my dreams and my nightmares. It was really hard to do, and I'm really glad it's out there, and I'm happy that it keeps going and it tells the stories that I think need to be told. I teach, and I teach through documentaries. And the one quote that I always like is, I can't remember whose it is, but I read about it. Charlene Hunter-Gault said, is that she had a professor who said, the thing about history is that we don't learn from history. The thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. It's a haunting quote because, of course, we'd like to think we learn from history. We'd like to think we use things in history to do things differently. But if it's true that that the thing about history is that we don't learn from history, then we all have the responsibility of our lives to live our lives again as though we have those choices to make. And we certainly do. And I think that's what's I find very interesting in terms of teaching and in terms of how to tell these stories, is we can't really expect the stories to change history. And I think that's worth thinking about.
You've certainly given us a lot to think about today.
Thank you.
And I'm grateful, as is our audience, for your beautiful film. So I'm really glad to be able to present it to our to our audience. And so thank you, Aviva. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Dr. Noemi Perelman-Mattis, Mom. Thank you to our audience. See you all later in the month. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Be well. Bye-bye.